Back inside our Needham project, and we have our oak floors installed. We have the living room trusses nearly complete, and we also are taking delivery of our final staircase from the first to the second floor, as well as from the first down to the basement. So first things first, the trusses are installed into this living room. I want to talk to you a little bit about why we did it the way we did it. A lot of questions came up talking about, hey, why didn't we just use flat stock and wrap framing lumber or something like that? It was very specific in our brief with the client that they really wanted an authentic looking truss up there. We could have considered framing the home with these trusses as being part of the structure, but similar to using casing, we don't need a really beautiful detailed casing that Kuiken Brothers provides. We could just put a piece of flat stock, but it's designed like this for the aesthetics. This is not providing any more value in the sense of what the casing does by being more detailed, similar to these beams. It's an aesthetic piece. But we did want to use a solid hemlock beam for the authenticity of those trusses. So if you look up, there's actually some small cracking in it. And just the other day we were standing here and we heard a big pop. That was those beams drying out. There's some moisture in them and they're going to continue to dry out over time. Those cracks are called checks. It's not going to affect the structural integrity of the beam, but it's going to give a really nice look over time as those continue to dry, shrink, and crack. The last piece of what is going up, if you look here, there's actually some exposed hardware. We actually have a bracket that is going to curve and come down the wall on either end. Those are the last pieces to be installed, and then those will get stained their final color, which will be a similar medium brown as the floor. Speaking of the floor, we talked about the fact that these are flat sawn white oak floors, 5-inch. They are solid. They are character grade, as we call it. So character grade meaning that we're going to have wormholes, some knots. It's going to be part of the overall character of these floors, and to be determined whether we'll fill those or we'll just finish over them. I believe I heard Mike talking about doing some samples for the client to look at to find out if we're going to fill them. Oftentimes, with a character grade floor, we will fill them, but we'll fill them with a black epoxy. It's going to continue to show as a whole, but it's going to just give you that smooth surface as you walk across it. The thing with leaving some of the holes as is, you obviously run the risk of that being a sock catcher, which we don't want. We certainly don't want anyone getting a splinter, so that black epoxy is a nice detail. So the floors have been installed pretty much throughout the entire first floor here, and we'll go upstairs and look at some of those in more depth. Before we do, sitting on the floor here is actually our handrails. Our handrails were prefabricated off-site by Bob King Stair out of New Hampshire, and over in the entryway here, we actually have our first of 2 staircases being delivered. So if I'm standing here in the entryway, we have a staircase that is going down to the basement. That was manufactured off-site. They're going to get that one set first, followed by the one that goes from the first floor up to the second floor. Benefit of building these off-site is they're built like millwork or cabinetry. They're in a shop environment, they're pre-manufactured. This is really where a lot of the coordination comes into play with our site super, our team, as well as the team at King Stair, making sure that they understand exactly what the conditions are on site, so they can feel confident in building this off-site, bringing it in as a furniture piece or a millwork piece. These stairs are finished. Of course, we'll have some abuse with construction, but they're being installed later in the game and they're coming fully protected. Another thing that we're working on this week is the guys from Trowel Inc. are on site. Behind me, you can actually see our blue board, which is the general shape of our plaster hood. So this hood, it was fabricated by our carpentry team and then wrapped in a blue board, and then Colby and his team are going to be plastering this, and this will be a raw plaster. So what will happen is they will trowel on a raw plaster, which will give it a limestone-esque finish, and then at the very end they will seal that because they are going to be cooking in that space. That is where the range is going to be. So cooking fumes and oils, we don't want to be staining that hood, but it's going to give that real old world stone hood aesthetic when it's all said and done. Mike's actually working with them and detailing out where that plaster starts and stops, because ultimately at the very end, the last piece of this beyond the millwork will be a brick backsplash, and that brick backsplash is what is going to pull some of that exterior detailing out, as well as what we see in the mudroom. So as we walk through Home Center, we have our pantry here, and then what you see back here is the reclaimed tile. So Mike is actually in process of grouting this right now. We did the herringbone pattern, and then we have this border going around each room where it's just a running bond brick pattern. And then in an area like this, or anywhere that there's millwork, we just ran that running bond continuous, because essentially what the final condition will be here is just cabinetry that lands down on top of the brick tile. Now, oftentimes the question comes up, why not just leave that out? Well, we could just stop the tile up against the millwork, but one of the things that I've always thought is, if they were to ever change this cabinetry or modify something, or the cabinetry adjust, or there would be a last minute change, at least that brick is continuous, and that millwork lands on top of it. Makes scribing that baseboard a little difficult with an irregular tile like this, but the team of material can certainly do that. Why don't we head upstairs? So upstairs, all of the hardwood floor has been installed. We saw previously in the last episode, all the door and window trim was installed. Standing in the hallway here, you can look down the floor. You can see that character grade white oak. Again, it's a 5-inch wide white oak floor. This is provided by Long Plank up in New Hampshire, and the guys at Premier Woodcrafting did the install. And this is a detail that we try to implement in a lot of our jobs. When we are bringing the base on top of our floor, we want to pre-sand and pre-stain the floor in that location. If this floor would ever shrink, or this baseboard would ever shrink, if you have a darker than natural color flooring, you're gonna get that line against that baseboard. Of course, we're maintaining humidity. Mike is monitoring humidity every day on this job, but ultimately we know we're gonna get some seasonal movement. So when we do get that seasonal movement and this board was removed, we're not gonna get this raw oak looking line. That stain goes all the way underneath, and then the team installs the baseboard down on top of it. Now let's talk about the install and how we go about that. In this room here, great example, we would set up a laser and essentially create a level line around the room. Now, it's new construction. Our floor should be really flat, should be really level, but there's always gonna be minor discrepancies. If our baseboard is 6 inches tall, we're gonna set that laser to be at the highest point, meaning the lowest point in the room would be 6 inches from that line down to the floor. And we would set that baseboard high, and then we would scribe the bottom of that baseboard. So when you drop that baseboard in place, we're sitting nice and tight against that floor. This is the final condition. There is no shoe molding in this home. Back bay, we installed the flooring tight to the baseboard for a number of reasons. Here, it makes sense. It's a solid product, not engineered. We were also at a point in the project where we could get all of the doors and all the casing installed and install the floor prior to baseboard. Staining under that baseboard is a small detail that makes a big difference for the end user, and especially for how this will age over time. As we work our way down the hallway, I really just want to kind of showcase some of the character that is in this floor. You're getting a lot of the knots. Here's a great one right here, very dark, but you can see how that right there is completely hollow. But this is an area that we may, come back and fill with, black epoxy, just so it's smooth and it doesn't become a sock catcher, as I call it. Now this floor will get completely protected, as you saw down on the first floor, and then we will stain and finish this towards the end of the project. So we'll just install a ram board over the entire floor and then and ultimately protect that. You'll see here, and in just about every doorway, we're doing these transition pieces where, despite which direction the flooring is, we're always running a piece from side to side in the jamb, which is essentially our threshold, but it is flush. And what Mike's done is essentially lined up our jamb, so the corner of this jamb is lined up with our threshold all the way across. And you're gonna see that in every door here, with the exception of the closet door, because that is not intended to be a focal point. But as we work our way down, you can see here that, we have that 5-inch, but then you have this smaller rip, because what Mike's done is actually a full width to match the jamb here. So they have that wider stock, and then start that pattern again. And that's gonna be at every single door. And it's more prominent when you're going perpendicular to the floor direction, but you can see how we've done it there too. This is a great opportunity to see that laser, how they're setting the laser for the overall height in that baseboard, making sure that the baseboard is straight at the very top. If I'm standing in this room here, looking at that window is nice and straight. If that baseboard was out of level by a 1/2 inch, that space between the baseboard and the window apron would grow as it went across, and that would just accentuate the fact that that floor is not perfectly level. You have to think about optics and how someone experiences the space. So keeping that baseboard nice and level on the top, and then cutting out the discrepancies when it hits the floor is going to help keep a really nice, consistent, and aesthetically pleasing reveal between that apron and that baseboard. The guys could be flying in, putting baseboard in as fast as possible, not scribing it, and you would end up with a decent product. But how much time are you really saving? If you're already scribing it to fit against the floor, which almost every baseboard install I've seen has been scribed when you're sitting on top of the floor, to take the extra time to make sure that you're setting the top of that base cap level, you were talking minutes. It's not that big of an add. And when you get into a rhythm or you get into a system, you can really make a lot of forward progress and end up with a really quality result. Again, it's not something that we're making overly complicated. It's just an extra step we're taking to make sure that we're thinking about how the end user interacts with the space and how optically it feels.